Hi there. I'm so excited to be presenting this interview that I did with Beth Wetmore. Beth, her debut novel, Valentine, recently came out and it was an immediate New York Times bestseller. Well, can you imagine that? I can't. How the heck did that happen? Well, Beth is going to tell you, and take heart, because it took her 14 years to write the book, because like many of us, she wasn't a full-time author. And it took many drafts to finish it, and that should give you heart also, because I know I'm on probably the 6th draft of my novel. But anyway, it's not an easy process, as we know, and sometimes you get lucky and get your novel published, and sometimes you get even luckier and you end up on the New York Times bestseller list. Well, she is the very definition of tenacity. She's going to tell us about her process and how she names her characters and what she's working on next. And here's a really wonderful thing, because she's so delightful. She is going to be our keynote speaker at our rescheduled conference, which is now March 20th and 21st, 2021. So easy enough to remember, 2021, 2021. A lucky date, and we're looking forward to it. And we hope to see you there. And I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Elizabeth Wetmore. Thanks for watching. Okay, I think we're recording. So I'm Samantha Hoffman with Chicago Writers Association and the executive director of Let's Just Write, an Uncommon Writers Conference. And I am speaking with Elizabeth Wetmore, who has written a book called Valentine, which is her debut novel, and which has gotten a lot of hype and a lot of press and a lot of accolades. And I'm always very skeptical of books that get a lot of attention. And then I started reading your book, and I know why it's getting all this attention. Now, I haven't finished it. I'm in the middle of it, but Beth, it is so beautifully written.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you're enjoying it. It's been a joy to hear from people who have been moved by these characters. So thank you.
Yeah, so tell me about you. We were talking a little bit off stage, and you said how surprised you are at all the attention it's getting. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I worked on the book for a very long time, and it's my debut book. I am 52, and this is my first book, and I think when you're working on a book for that long, you never really know if it's any good, and even, once it's sold. What's that?
How long did you work on it?
14 years. So now, to be fair, it would be misleading to say 14 years and just leave it at that, because I did not get up every day and work on the book. I set it aside for long periods of time to earn a living, or to, take care of my son, or frankly, because I just lost my nerve. It was so incredibly important to me to get this story right, and to kind of honor the characters in this book who are not characters that we've seen a whole lot of in fiction. That part of the world is not on a lot of people's radar. So it's really important to me to get it right. So I didn't really know. And in fact, the night before the book came out, and the book came out on March 31st. So we were all, well into the COVID-19 crisis. But I turned to my husband the night before the book came out, and I said, I think once the book comes out, things are going to get very quiet around here. And of course, that's not how it went. And I'm incredibly grateful and delighted, of course, but it has been a surprise and a steep learning curve, but I'm delighted. It's so good to know that people are reading the book and responding to it. So.
Well, and tell me a little bit about how this all happened and how it came about, how you got a publisher and that whole process, and then how it got all this attention.
For me, once I finished the book, and that was the thing. Once I actually finished the book, I was actually very fortunate. The book sold pretty quickly to HarperCollins, and they have been incredibly supportive of the book. In fact, when I had my book tour canceled, as we all did, everyone who had books coming out this spring, when the book tour was canceled, they really worked with me immediately to help me adjust and to move things to an online forum. So in terms of the publishing itself, I've actually been incredibly fortunate. For me, the struggle was to finish the book, and once I was able to do that, luckily the book sold pretty quickly. So.
Did you have an agent while you were working on it?
I did. My agent Samantha Shea with George Burchard actually saw one of my short stories in a literary journal and reached out to me. And so she was so patient and good. We were together for 4 years, and she was able to place a couple of short stories for me, but she was incredibly patient while I finished up the book. So.
How wonderful. How wonderful. And then she found HarperCollins right away when she submitted it?
Yeah, I can't remember all the exact dates, but the book went out in early-ish August, I think right around August the 10th. And of course I thought, well, it's August, it's New York, nothing's ever going on in New York and publishing in August. So I kind of settled in for the long haul, and the book actually sold in I think 6 days. So yeah, it was remarkable.
And what did that feel like?
Surprising and so thrilling, honestly. I mean, I think another part of working on a book for that long is a kind of a kind of fear. What if someone worked on a book for 14 years of her life and no one wanted it? But my family, and in particular my husband, had made enormous sacrifices for me to be able to finish the book. So I was so happy, on my own behalf, but I was also incredibly gratified, in terms of the effect this would have on my entire family. So
Yeah, they must be very proud.
I think so.
um, it's such a disturbing time now with the coronavirus and with the civil unrest and everything that's going on. How is your writing going now? Are you?
Oh gosh. I think like probably a lot of writers, well, I've been busy with the book, so that's, to be fair. I think like a lot of writers right now, I'm struggling to put into words and to make sense of what's going on in the world. And I have always gone to my writing as a way of doing that. In spite of not writing fiction until a little later in life, I've always been a devoted journal, keeper. And so I think like a lot of people, I've been struggling to kind of make sense of it all. And I was joking to my husband the other day. I said, I think I was about to finish a journal because I keep old-fashioned journals. I do things in longhand, and I said to him the other day, I was about to wrap up one of these journals, and I said, I think this is just one to burn in the backyard because it's really just a page after page of the kind of longhand equivalent to sort of rocking back and forth in the corner, but you keep at it and you hope that that something in there will be helpful to the world at some point. And I think like a lot of people, it's becoming clearer to me every day, that staying quiet is not an option. So
Right. Yeah, I don't know about, I mean, don't burn the journal, but um, I also have journaled since I was small, young, not small, but and I find I probably write more, and I write longhand also, so I have all these books in a bin that I've kept over the years, and I find that I write in my journals more when I have something to process, when I'm worried about something or upset or can't figure something out, or like this, talking about this situation we're in. And I just find it cathartic to write it down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go back in time and tell me what inspired you to be a writer and like when you started writing.
So, I did not write my first short story until I was in my mid to late 20s. But I was always a reader, and as a little girl, I was an avid reader. So avid, in fact, that if I finished a book and no one had time to take me to the library, I would just flip back to the beginning of the book and start all over again. And my favorite books I read again and again. And so for me, as a little girl growing up in West Texas, in a pretty rough and tumble oil town, books were really kind of a salvation. They were the first places that I um, understood that the world wasn't the same everywhere, that the world I saw growing up as a little girl in West Texas in the 1970s was not the way the world was everywhere else and the way people were everywhere else. And so I read, for all kinds of reasons. I read for escape and I read for pleasure, and I read to understand people better. But I also read, at least at the beginning, to see that the world was not the same. And for me, that was really sort of life-changing. I joke to this day that one of the top 10 most important moments of my life was the day the bookmobile pulled into my hometown and parked on a gravel lot about 3 blocks from the street where I grew up, because it meant I could ride my bike over and check out as many books as I wanted to. I didn't have to wait for someone to drive me downtown. And that's true. So while I didn't write until a bit later, I not only loved books, but I loved writers. I thought to write must be the most, one of the holiest professions in the world. And I think that, yikes. I don't know what happened here.
When you were writing the book, did you have like a critique group? Did you have beta readers? Did your husband read for you? How did that go?
Well, my husband is a poet, and writes beautiful poetry, and so he's in a lot of ways my first reader and one of my best readers, because he doesn't really aspire to write fiction, but he has a beautiful sort of sense of language and rhythm and the musicality of the words, and so he always reads everything. But yes, I had friends, I had acquaintances from graduate school who were enormously helpful to me. And I had a number of different kinds of readers. I had other fiction writers who were able to advise. I had one friend who's a playwright who read and offered wonderful insights and skills into things like scene setting and dialogue. I had friends read who had no aspirations to be writers, but they love to read, and in a lot of ways they're the best readers of all, because they can tell you things that you don't expect, that you maybe don't see yourself. So
Right. How do you name your characters?
oh gosh. Well, with Valentine, I had an old phone book that I had lifted from my parents when they retired and were getting rid of things back in the days when people had phone books, and I found it to be a wonderful tool. Not the least of which has been to help me find particularly surnames that are common to that part of the world. West Texas, that part of West Texas, the Europeans who settled it were largely English. And so I like to use common names, and I like to use names that feel right to me. I also choose them for euphony, how they sound. I try not to have too many characters whose names begin with J, that sort of thing. So, but mostly, and I change their names constantly. Yeah, I do. In fact, there's a chapter titled Suzanne that happens kind of late in the book, and that character's name was Catherine through 5 or 6 drafts of the book. So I changed it at the last minute because it just didn't quite suit her personality.
so funny. It's like they, you know, they have their own personalities, and all of a sudden you think this is not their name.
Right. Yeah. It's funny how real characters become to me. You know, I've had occasion to be talking with people about the book, and they've commented that when I talk about my characters, it's almost as if they're real people, and to me they are. You know, as they should be, right? To kind of go out into the world of fiction and sort of stand on their own 2 feet. They have to be as real as you can possibly make them. So.
Um, when you're writing, um, or let's say when you started your book, did you do outline? Did you have characters in mind? Did you know the story, beginning, middle, end? How did that go?
I did not. I don't think I don't think I've ever sketched out an outline of anything, a short story or anything else, until I'm at least several drafts into it. For me, I have to figure out everything I'm going to understand about a character or a book on the page. So I generally start with, you know, a sort of very sort of general idea of a character, or an image, or sometimes a line of dialogue that I've overheard somewhere. And then I sit down and write, and I figure everything out as I'm writing. So no, I did not know where this book was going to begin, and I didn't know where it would end, until I had several drafts, you know, under my belt. And even in the last drafts, I was making some major decisions at the very last minute. Um, so. You know, for example, this book is told from the points of view of 7 women and girls, and I was probably 5 or 6 drafts into the book, where with 3 male points of view. So I had 3 chapters told from the point of view of some of the men in the book, and I plucked those out very late in the process, and either let them become their own thing, a couple of short stories, or handed their stories over to the female narrators. So, and that was a decision that was made pretty late. So.
And so do those characters still exist in the book?
Oh yeah, they are. Corinne Shepherd's husband, Potter, the young man that Deborah Ann Pierce is taking care of, Jesse, John Ledbetter, a character who's, you know, a very minor character, but nonetheless, you know, and I think part of it was that because I was writing about the oil patch, and in particular, I was writing about the sort of blue collar aspect of the oil patch, which is a incredibly male dominated industry even today. You don't have a lot of women working as roughnecks. And so for at least at first, because that economy was such a crucial part of the book, it was hard for me to imagine writing the book without having male voices in the book. So.
Yeah. The oil patch is a section of Texas where the oil rigs are. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's you know, yeah, it's in far.
Word. What does that mean?
Oh, the oil patch. Yeah, it's in West Texas in the Permian Basin, which is about 86,000 square miles of land, in sort of the not the far end of West Texas, but sort of between El Paso and Dallas. And it's a huge oil rich, oil and natural gas rich region. And you know, it's an interesting place because I've lived in Chicago for long enough that when I talk with my friends about the oil and gas industry, I've noticed that they tend to have a very particular image in their minds of who those people are. So they imagine sort of big oil executives and big oil companies, and less common, I think, is for them to imagine the men and women whose entire livelihood depends on this very difficult, very dangerous, very, you know, sort of environmentally devastating work. You know, something I often say to my friends is, you know, if you think the oil industry is hard on the environment, go to my hometown, right? Because no one suffers more immediately from the fallout of that than the people who live in my hometown. But there are also people who, under the best of circumstances, you know, even in the midst of an oil boom, are generally just hanging on to the, you know, lower end of the middle class. And so when an oil bust happens, it's devastating for the local economy, you know.
Right. Do you read reviews of your book?
Well, I did. And when the book first came out, I did. And I decided very quickly that that was a terrible idea and was really only looking for trouble. I think the thing that did it for me was an early Amazon review where I was accused of hating men and hating Texas and hating cats, actually, oddly. Which is hilarious because I'm sitting here looking at two cats. And also I very much considered Valentine to be a love letter to my hometown, you know, and a love letter to Texas. It's not an easy book, and I tried to pull no punches when I talked about things like racism and misogyny, you know, which are really of a piece in a lot of ways. But, you know, I also in particular tried to honor the lives of these women, you know, that I knew growing up who became my characters, who were women without a lot of resources, without a lot of money or education, who were in some cases very young. You know, my book opens with a 26-year-old woman who has a 9-year-old daughter. You know, I mean, these are very young women in this book, and I'm very interested in how women with those limited resources manage to find a way, you know, to support themselves, to support each other, you know, to act in ways that are courageous. And it's something I think a lot about. So yeah, so I learned early to stay away from the reviews. And I'm very fortunate because I have an amazing editor and an amazing agent and an amazing publicist. And so I was able to tell them, you know, if this is, you know, of course I want to hear the good stuff, you know, and I'm also very interested in hearing anything that may be helpful to me as a writer.
Yes.
You know, so, you know, so any review that, you know, would take me to task for maybe not handling racism or, you know, or questions of race with the sensitivity that I maybe needed to, I'm very interested in those kinds of things that I can learn from as a writer. But, you know, but basically what I said to them is if it's just snarky and mean, I don't need to see that.
Most people don't know how to criticize or critique in a kind way. They're more passionate about it, so it comes off
right.
really bad.
Right. Well, and of course it's a novel, which means that it has flaws, right? You know, every work of art has flaws. I tried to learn to embrace those, you know, and the kind of, there's that great line from that old Leonard Cohen song, there's a crack in everything, right? That's how the light gets in. And so I've tried to embrace the flaws that I know are in the book, you know, as a different kind of beauty. But yeah, of course, you know, as a writer, you're always interested in sort of learning from what readers have to say, you know.
As long as you're kind.
Mm-hmm.
I have one Amazon review for my book, and the person who wrote it said, when she finished it, she threw it in the trash.
Oh God, that's awful. Oh.
Well, at least she finished it.
Right. Yeah. I know. It's a strange thing. You know, the way sort of being connected has allowed so many of us under the veil of anonymity to feel free to say things that we would never say to one another in person, you know. So I have a strict rule now against Googling myself. So
That's probably wise.
Mm.
Do you have other books that you've written and maybe not finished, or is this the?
I do. In fact, I am, well, while I was working on this book, among other things, I wrote 2 complete collections of short stories. And I've been taking a look at those again now that the book is done, I'm hoping to maybe, place those in the next year or so, because they're really more or less done. And the short story is really the form that I feel most comfortable with as a writer in a lot of ways. It's the form I think that comes most naturally to me. And I think you see that in the novel as well, the way a lot of the chapters feel very contained and complete in and of themselves. But I'm also looking forward to the next novel, which is also going to be set in Odessa, and about 6 years later than Valentine. So in the next book, about 6 years will have lapsed, and those girls then growing up on Larkspur Lane will be teenagers, which I think is an amazing time to write about characters, especially young women. I think 15 and 16 is just a great age for fictional characters. So that's the next project. So
that's going to be a continuation, the same characters, or?
I think a couple of them will be. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of characters in Valentine who are major characters who will either be minor characters in the next book or won't exist at all. And then, of course, a whole new cast of new characters as well. So,
you're when you say that about short stories being your go-to, that is obvious when you read the book, but it doesn't feel, there are some authors who write connected short stories, but they feel like short stories. Your book does not. I mean, they are self-contained chapters, but it's all very connected and cohesive. It's just really beautifully done.
Thank you. And initially I had imagined this as maybe being a collection of linked short stories. And I think what sort of pushed me over the edge was, as much as I love short stories, one of the things I love most about novels is the extra wiggle room to really explore an idea, and to really kind of meander a bit more. And so there were some ideas that I found myself wanting to explore, the idea of how one steps up to the plate and acts in courageous ways when you feel as if nothing in your life has ever indicated that you could be heroic, right? I mean, I think we're seeing a little bit of this right now, the desperate need for good-hearted, well-intentioned people to stand against, inequities and injustices that we're witnessing, even if that means standing up to the people we most love in the world. And so those were ideas, the idea of, what do you do when a stranger, comes to your door asking for help, right? Whether or not that stranger is a little girl who's just, endured a horrific crime, right? Or that stranger is a family of immigrants who have shown up at your front door, looking for a better life. And so those were all ideas that I really wanted to play with, and the novel form suited that, I think. So.
And you have a blurb from Ann Patchett. How did that happen?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I was blown away, and incredible, and just delighted and surprised. And she has been, in addition to giving the blurb for the book, she has been an advocate for Valentine from the word go. I can't tell you how many times I have seen video of her talking about her 10 books that she's recommending for the spring, and she's just been a real champion of the book, really, the whole way through. So I'm the minute we're all free to move about the cabin, I am really looking forward to going to her bookstore and shaking her hand and telling her thank you in person, or maybe not shaking hands, maybe just waving from 6 feet, but nonetheless, she's been just a real champion for the book. So
that must have been just thrilling. She's one of my favorites. So
yeah, and her new book is beautiful. So have you read her new book, The Dutch House?
I'm reading it right now for my book club. So,
lovely.
Yeah. But I stopped because I have a little time before book club, and I wanted to get into yours, and I may not be able to put yours down to finish yours for book club. Did you ever read the book Descent by Tim Johnston?
I have not read that.
You know, for some reason, and the stories are very different, but for some reason, Valentine reminds me of that book because um, that book is about a family, but it's about a horrendous situation and it's told from different points of view. And it has the same kind of urgency that I feel with yours. You know, it's kind of like as I'm reading, there's this something hanging over me and I'm waiting for that to happen. And that's how I felt with Tim's book as well. You might read it. It has nothing to do with yours, not even close, but I don't know. For some reason it just
Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, thanks. I just wrote it down, so thank you.
um let's see, tell me about how about your writing process? Do you have a regular routine that you follow, or when is the best time to write?
Well, I did before my whole family semi-permanently moved back into the house. No, this is the first time actually that I am now able to write full time, which is such an amazing gift, you know. And so that's what I'm doing going forward, and what I'm hoping to do. I'm sorry, excuse
No,
me.
that's you know,
He's
that's
a
what
big
mom does. And if he wasn't sleeping, he would be doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah, he's a big baby. He really loves me. But before, you know, all of this, yeah, typically I got up and gave my kid a lift to school, because he's not a morning person either. And so even though he's perfectly capable of taking the train, I generally gave him a lift. And actually, to be fair, it's quite a long commute for him. But I found out something else amazing, which is that if you have a 15-year-old son, they stop telling you a lot. But if you get them in the car with a cup of coffee, you can find out all kinds of wonderful things about their lives. So it kind of became our thing, you know, this time in the mornings. And then after I dropped him off at school, I generally, if there were any errands to be run, you know, I would do those and then get home. I am also not a morning person. I wake up very slowly. And so I typically came home and took care of business, emails, correspondence, whatever, and then took a long walk to clear my head and began working. So afternoons and evenings are kind of my prime work time. So,
You know, I think being able to be a full-time writer is a blessing and a curse.
yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny. I once had a writing teacher who said, you know, if you want to write fiction, don't quit your job, take a second one. And his point was, you know, the point was well taken, right? Which is that when you have that pressure, right, when you're like, I have 1 hour, you know, my kid is going to be napping for 1 hour, or, you know, I've got 1 hour before I have to hop in the shower and get ready for work. I mean, that can really put a fair amount of pressure on you. So I have always been a pretty slow writer. I am definitely a writer who can labor over a single paragraph for an entire morning and then throw the whole thing out, you know, and start over again. And so for me, it is really such a gift to have long stretches of time. You know, if I can just get these people out of my house. So I'm just joking. So yeah.
Soon we'll be back to normal, whatever.
Indeed, of course, of course.
Yeah. Well, this has just been delightful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to meet you and talk with you. So thank you so much.